Either resign or I'll ruin your reputation, the president hissed, leaning across his glass desk. His voice was low but vibrated with rage. I know about your children's medical needs. One call from me, and no company in this industry will touch you. I clutched my notebook against my chest, feeling my heart beat through the spiral binding. Three small faces flashed through my mind. Ren, Theo, and Penny, waiting at home with the babysitter. I'll clean my desk, I murmured, eyes downcast. He relaxed, victory softening his features. Smart choice, Abilene. 4 hours later, I sat across from investigative journalist Rowan Isles in a secluded park bench. Between us, a manila envelope containing what I'd gathered over 3 years. This is everything? Rowan asked. Almost, I replied. Before you publish anything, there's something else you should know. Before I tell you what happened next, I need you to understand. This isn't just about revenge. It's about justice that blooms slowly, deliberately, like a poison garden tended with patience. Stay with me until the end, because what I did changed not just my life, but an entire industry. If you've ever been silenced, underestimated, or forced to smile while swallowing rage, this story belongs to you too. My name is Abilene Nash, 41 years old, former executive assistant to Grayson Porter, president of a financial services firm handling billions in client assets. I started working for him 3 years ago, 6 months after my husband Emmett died unexpectedly from an undiagnosed heart condition. I'm the kind of woman people forget in meetings. The one taking notes, refilling water glasses, scheduling follow-ups, the invisible machinery that keeps offices running. I have a talent for anticipating needs before they're voiced, for remembering the smallest details about people's preferences. My superpower has always been making other people look good. After Emmett died, I needed a job with excellent health insurance. Our youngest, Penny, has juvenile arthritis that requires expensive treatments. The twins, Ren and Theo, were just starting middle school. The grief counselor had warned me they might develop behavioral issues, which they did. Ren through withdrawal, Theo through disruption. Porter's firm offered the best benefits package and a salary that would keep us in our modest home. The interview process had been rushed. His previous assistant had left suddenly, though nobody explained why. I was desperate enough not to question my good fortune. The first week was challenging but manageable. Porter seemed demanding but fair. He had impossibly high standards and expected immediate responses at all hours, but the compensation seemed worth it. By the second week, I witnessed my first red flag. Porter screaming at the marketing director until she cried, then calmly returning to our budget meeting as if nothing had happened. She needs thicker skin, he told me afterward, noticing my discomfort. We're not running a daycare here. I nodded and smiled because my children needed their medications. By month 3, I understood the pattern. Porter cultivated an inner circle of yes people while isolating and eventually eliminating anyone who questioned him. He manipulated financial reports, shifting losses between quarters to maintain the appearance of consistent growth. He pressured account managers to push clients toward investments that generated higher fees regardless of performance. During my first year, 7 employees either resigned or were terminated after raising concerns. Each departure was explained away: performance issues, family obligations, career changes. Each replacement was younger, less experienced, more pliable. I started keeping records after witnessing Porter threaten the compliance officer, a woman named Vivienne who had flagged inconsistencies in client billing. "Find a way to make this work," he'd snarled, "or I'll make sure your career doesn't survive this conversation." That night, I created my system. Not electronic records that could be monitored or discovered, but handwritten notes on plain paper stored beneath the insulation in our attic. Dates, conversations, numbers, patterns. I memorized details during work hours and transcribed them each evening after putting my children to bed. I learned which board members were complicit, the chairman, Dustin, and treasurer, Alton, and which remained ignorant, mostly the newer appointees. I documented every violation while smiling at Porter's jokes and bringing him coffee exactly how he preferred it, medium roast with a precise half-inch of cream, never stirred. For 2 years, I maintained this double life. At work, I was the perfect assistant, efficient, discreet, seemingly loyal. At home, I was an archivist of corporate crime, meticulously documenting a case that grew stronger with each passing week. My children noticed the strain. "Mom, you look tired," Ren observed one morning as I packed lunches. At 13, she'd become perceptive beyond her years, stepping into a caretaker role I never wanted for her. "Just work stuff," I assured her. "Nothing important." But it was important. I was watching Porter destroy people's careers on whims, manipulate financial data that affected thousands of clients' retirement funds, and create a culture of fear that silenced anyone with integrity. I considered reporting him multiple times. I researched whistleblower protections and anonymous tip lines. Each time, I hesitated, thinking about what would happen to my children if I lost this job. Penny's treatments alone cost thousands each month. The twins needed stability. Without my income and insurance, everything would collapse. So I waited and watched and documented. Then came the quarterly audit. I noticed Porter growing increasingly agitated as the date approached. Certain discrepancies couldn't be hidden this time. A major client had withdrawn funds after questioning returns, creating a significant gap in projected revenue. Someone would need to take the blame. When Porter called me into his office yesterday morning and closed the door, I knew it would be me. "Abilene," he began with that artificial calm he used when destroying someone's livelihood. "We've restructured your position. Your services are no longer required." I felt my face go slack. "May I ask why?" His expression hardened. "Let's not pretend. There have been inconsistencies in the quarterly reports you've prepared, errors that raised questions with the audit team." This was a lie. I had prepared the reports exactly as he had instructed, including the manipulated figures he had provided. "I followed your directions precisely," I said quietly. That's when his tone shifted. "Either resign willingly, or I'll ensure you leave with a reputation so damaged no company will hire you again. Think about your situation, Abilene. Think about your children." I felt nothing as I packed my personal items into a cardboard box provided by Human Resources. 15 minutes later, I was escorted from the building, my keycard deactivated before I reached the parking garage. In my car, I removed a business card I'd kept hidden in my wallet for nearly a year. Rowan Isles, investigative journalist. We'd met briefly at a charity event where Porter had been honored for corporate citizenship. Rowan had asked pointed questions that Porter deflected with practiced charm. Afterward, Rowan had slipped me their card. "If you ever want to talk about what it's really like working there," Rowan had murmured. I'd kept the card but never called. Until now. Which brings us back to that park bench, the manila envelope between us, and my incomplete revenge. "I need your word," I told Rowan as they reviewed my evidence. "The story doesn't run until I say." Rowan looked up, eyes narrowed. "Why wait? This is enough to launch an investigation." "Because an investigation isn't enough," I explained. "Porter has weathered investigations before. He has powerful friends, expensive lawyers. I don't want him to face questions. I want him to lose everything, just like he threatened to take everything from me." "What are you planning?" Rowan asked. "Something slower, more complete." I outlined my approach, not the swift justice people crave in stories, but a methodical unraveling that would leave no possibility of recovery. First, I contacted Marielle, the vice president of operations who had always been kind to me. "I'm concerned about what might emerge in the audit." I said vaguely over coffee. "You might want to distance yourself from certain decisions." I shared just enough specific information to plant doubt without implicating myself as the source. Next, I reached out to Leona, the board chair's executive assistant. "I think there's something the chair should know before the shareholder meeting," I suggested, mentioning specific dates of questionable transactions that would raise red flags if investigated. For 6 weeks, I made quiet connections, never directly accusing, always appearing concerned for the company's welfare. I shared selective truths with strategic people, an accountant here, a compliance officer there, an investor relations manager who had access to major shareholders. Questions began circulating. Porter noticed the changing atmosphere but couldn't identify its source. Board members started requesting additional documentation for decisions he'd previously pushed through without scrutiny. Meanwhile, I found work at a smaller financial planning firm. The pay was less, but the owner valued my experience and efficiency. I arranged more flexible hours to be with my children, whose health insurance I now provided through a marketplace plan that cost more but maintained their care. 2 months after my dismissal, Porter's closest ally on the board, Alton, requested an unexpected review of international transactions. Porter couldn't refuse without appearing suspicious. The review revealed questionable fee structures that triggered further inquiries. 3 months in, whispers spread about irregularities in client billing. Key investors began asking questions. Porter grew visibly paranoid, according to my sources still inside the company. He began lashing out at previously loyal employees, creating new enemies with each outburst. By month 4, he was sleeping in his office, micromanaging departments that had previously operated independently. Projects stalled. Clients noticed the disorganization and began withdrawing their business. I watched from afar as Porter dismantled his own empire brick by brick, driven by fear of an enemy he couldn't identify, an enemy who had spent years learning his vulnerabilities from the chair beside his desk. The breaking point came during the semi-annual board meeting. Porter, exhausted and suspicious, accused 3 board members of conspiring against him. His outburst shocked everyone, including those who had defended him for years. That night, I called Rowan. It's time. The story broke the next morning, not just about financial fraud, but a systematic pattern of abuse, threats, and retaliation against employees. Former staff members came forward with their own experiences, emboldened by the first revelation. What made this exposure different wasn't just the evidence. It was that by the time it happened, Porter had already destroyed his support network. He had no allies left to help manage the crisis. The board members he'd alienated didn't defend him. The executives he'd threatened were quick to distance themselves. Most devastating of all, no one was surprised. The gradual shift in perception meant the story merely confirmed what everyone had come to suspect on their own. When Porter called me a week later, his voice was unrecognizable. "Why didn't you just publish everything immediately?" he asked. "Why let me suffer for months?" "Because I wanted you to understand what it feels like when the floor disappears beneath you," I said. "I wanted you to dismantle your own life the way you threatened to dismantle mine." Porter lost everything: his position, his reputation, his freedom. The criminal investigation revealed far more than even I had documented. Former employees emerged with additional evidence. Clients filed lawsuits. Regulatory agencies imposed record-breaking fines. My children noticed the change in me immediately. The tension I'd carried for years dissolved gradually. "You smile more now," Theo observed one evening as we prepared dinner together. "I feel lighter," I admitted. Penny looked up from her homework. "Is it because that bad man got in trouble?" I considered how to answer. "It's because I didn't let fear stop me from doing what was right," I said finally. "Just took me longer than it should have." 6 months after Porter's downfall, I received a job offer from the restructured company, now under new leadership. The board wanted me as their compliance director, a position created specifically to prevent similar abuses of power. "Your intimate knowledge of what went wrong makes you uniquely qualified to ensure it never happens again," the new chairperson explained. I accepted the position with one condition: flexible hours that allowed me to be home when my children returned from school. The salary was higher than I'd ever earned as an assistant, with benefits that fully covered Penny's treatments. My first official act was to implement an anonymous reporting system that protected whistleblowers from retaliation. My second was to hang a small framed quotation in my new office: "Patience is not passive. It is concentrated strength." On my first day in the new role, I passed Porter's former office, now occupied by someone else, and felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no lingering resentment, just the quiet certainty that justice, even when delayed, had finally arrived. The journalist Rowan published a follow-up piece about corporate accountability, mentioning my new position without detailing my role in Porter's downfall. That remained between us, a private victory I didn't need to broadcast. At home that evening, I removed the last of my hidden documentation from the attic and shredded it. The children watched curiously as the papers disappeared into confetti. "What's all that?" Ren asked. "History," I replied. "We don't need it anymore." Later, as I tucked Penny into bed, she asked a question that caught me off guard. "Mom, are you a hero?" I thought about it. "No, sweetheart. I'm just someone who finally stopped being afraid." She considered this with the seriousness only a 9-year-old can muster. That sounds like a hero to me. Perhaps she was right. Not all heroes wear capes or make grand gestures. Some simply document the truth day after day, waiting for the right moment to use it. Some find courage not in fearlessness but in acting despite their fear. My revenge against Porter wasn't a single explosion but an invisible avalanche that he himself accelerated with every panicked step. I didn't destroy him. I simply created the conditions where he would destroy himself. Now, as I build new safeguards into a company once defined by its secrets, I think about power, how it corrupts, how it blinds, and how often it underestimates those it considers powerless. My name is Abilene Nash. I spent 3 years as the invisible woman beside a powerful man. I watched, I waited, and when the time came, I used his own tactics against him: patience, precision, and the understanding that sometimes the most effective weapon is simply the truth, deployed at exactly the right moment. The twins are thriving in high school now. Ren has joined the debate team, finding her voice after years of silence. Theo's behavioral issues have largely resolved, his energy channeled into sports. Penny's condition has stabilized with consistent treatment. Our home no longer vibrates with my constant anxiety. We have movie nights and weekend trips and ordinary arguments about chores and screen time. We have the luxury of normalcy, something I once thought we'd never achieve. Sometimes I wonder if Porter thinks about me from his drastically reduced circumstances. I wonder if he understands yet that his downfall began the moment he threatened a mother's ability to care for her children. I wonder if he realizes how many notes I took, how many conversations I memorized, how completely I understood his operation while appearing to understand nothing. I doubt it. Men like Porter rarely recognize the power of those they consider beneath them. That's their greatest weakness. And ultimately, it was his undoing. If you're listening to this and finding yourself in a similar situation, overlooked, underestimated, forced to smile while swallowing rage, remember my story. Your position might seem powerless, but your perspective is priceless. You see what others miss. You hear what isn't meant for your ears. You understand systems from the inside out. Knowledge accumulates. Evidence builds. Timing matters. And patience, true patience, isn't weakness. It's strategy. It's been 2 years since Porter's empire crumbled. The criminal case against him resulted in a 5-year sentence. Less than he deserved, but enough to dismantle the life he'd built. The financial penalties were far more devastating than the prison time. His assets were frozen, his properties seized, his reputation permanently tarnished. I've settled into my role as compliance director, transforming what was once a toxic workplace into something healthier. Most days, I can walk through the building without remembering how it felt to be invisible, to swallow my words, to smile while taking notes on corruption. Most days. Yesterday marked an unexpected turning point. I was reviewing applications for our mentorship program when I recognized a name: Cameron Porter, 22 years old, recent finance graduate, Grayson Porter's son. The application was earnest, humble even. Unlike the arrogance I'd expected from Porter's offspring, Cameron acknowledged his father's crimes in his personal statement. I want to understand where systems fail and how to build better ones. I know my family name carries negative associations, but I hope to be judged on my own merits. I sat with this application for hours, unsure how to proceed. Was this another Porter trying to infiltrate the company? A sincere young person seeking redemption for a family legacy? Or something more complicated? I decided to interview him myself. Cameron arrived precisely 5 minutes early, dressed conservatively but not expensively. His handshake was firm, his eye contact steady. He had his father's height but none of his imposing presence. "Thank you for meeting with me, Ms. Nash," he began. I understand if my application is problematic given the history. Why apply here specifically? I asked. There must be companies without such personal connections to your father's case. He nodded, accepting the directness of my question. 2 reasons. First, this firm has become the industry standard for ethical reform. The changes you've implemented are being studied in my business ethics course. I waited for his second reason. And honestly, I need to understand what happened. My father never admitted wrongdoing to us. Even now, he claims he was set up by jealous colleagues. Cameron looked down briefly. I don't believe him anymore, but I need to see for myself what he built and how it failed. Something in his earnestness reminded me of Theo, the way my son had struggled to understand his father's death, needing concrete answers to process his grief. What would your father say about you applying here? I asked. He doesn't know, Cameron replied. We haven't spoken in 8 months. I offered him an entry-level position in our client services department, far removed from any sensitive financial operations. His qualifications justified the offer, and something told me turning him away would only perpetuate the cycle of resentment. The board approved my decision with minimal resistance, another sign of how much the company culture had changed. On Cameron's first day, I watched him navigate the office, introducing himself without mentioning his last name, eager to earn respect rather than demand it. I recognized the behavior of someone accustomed to working twice as hard to receive half the credit. During his 3rd week, I invited him to my office. How are you adjusting? I asked. It's challenging, he admitted. Some people figured out who I am. There have been comments. Do you want to be transferred elsewhere? I have connections at other firms. He shook his head firmly. No, I need to be here. Why? Cameron hesitated before answering. My entire life, I watched my father crush people without consequence. I believed him when he said that's what success required. Now I need to see the alternative. I need to work somewhere built on something other than fear. I studied him, this young man carrying the weight of a legacy he never chose. Your father was brilliant in many ways, I said finally. He understood systems, spotted opportunities, built impressive structures. His fatal flaw wasn't intellectual, it was moral. He never understood that sustainable success requires trust. Cameron nodded slowly. He still doesn't understand. Even in prison, he's building a network of influence, planning his comeback. He looked directly at me. I've seen your name in his letters. He blames you specifically. A chill ran through me. Blames me for what? Everything. The timing of the revelations. The way his allies turned against him before the story broke. He says you orchestrated his downfall with a precision he almost admires. Cameron's expression was troubled. Is he right? I considered my answer carefully. Your father created the conditions for his own destruction. I simply chose not to protect him from the consequences of his actions. But you did more than that, Cameron pressed. The employees I've talked to, they describe a shift that happened months before the news broke. Someone was moving pieces on the board. I maintained eye contact. The truth has its own momentum once released. I can't take credit for how quickly it spread. He didn't look convinced, but didn't push further. Later that evening, as I helped Penny with her science project, a model of the solar system that had taken over our dining room table, I thought about Cameron's revelations. Porter was still fixated on me, still plotting, still failing to see that his own actions had caused his downfall. Mom, you're putting Neptune where Uranus should be, Penny pointed out, gently redirecting my attention. Sorry, sweetheart, got distracted. Thinking about work again? She repositioned the planets with practiced hands, her arthritis in remission for now. Something like that. Wren looked up from her homework at the kitchen counter. At 15, she'd grown perceptive in ways that sometimes unnerved me. Is it about that new guy? Porter's son? I hadn't mentioned Cameron to my children. How did you know about him? She shrugged. I follow the company's social media. They posted photos from the new employee orientation. I recognized the name. Does it bother you that he's working there? I asked. Wren considered this with the thoughtful deliberation that had become her hallmark. No, he's not his dad, just like we're not dad, even though we have his last name. The simple wisdom of teenagers. You're right. He's not his father. Besides, Theo interjected from where he was sprawled on the couch with a history textbook, if he turns out to be shady, you'll just take him down like you did his dad. Theo! I exclaimed, genuinely shocked. What are you talking about? He rolled his eyes dramatically. Mom, we're not babies. We know you did something to make sure that guy got what he deserved. And it was awesome. Yeah, Penny agreed, looking up from her planets. When Mia at school was being mean to me and you talked to her mom, you had that same look you get when you talk about your old boss. What look? I asked, unsettled by their observations. Like you're being super nice, but also like, don't mess with you, Penny explained. I felt a complex mix of emotions. Concern that my children had seen through me, pride that they approved, worry about what else they might have intuited over the years. The point is, Ren concluded, we know you protect us, and you're good at it. That night, after the children were asleep, I sat alone in our small backyard, considering what Cameron had shared and what my children had observed. Porter was still focusing on me, still unable to see the larger picture. Even in his downfall, he remained self-centered, refusing to acknowledge the pattern of his own behavior. My phone lit up with a text from Rowan. Porter filed appeal, claiming procedural errors, unlikely to succeed, but heads up. I wasn't surprised. Men like Porter never accept defeat. They just reframe the narrative. The next morning, I arrived early at the office and found Cameron waiting by my door. I need to tell you something, he said without preamble. My father's appealing his case. He's hired a new legal team, and they're planning to suggest that evidence was manipulated. By whom? I asked, though I already knew. By you. They're going to claim you planted evidence and orchestrated his downfall because he fired you. Cameron looked genuinely troubled. I don't believe it, but I thought you should know. I unlocked my office door and gestured for him to enter. Thank you for the warning. It's not unexpected. There's more. He continued once we were seated. He's been in contact with Alton from the old board. They're discussing ways to challenge the current leadership structure once the appeal creates doubt. I nodded, processing this information. Why are you telling me this? Cameron leaned forward. Because I've seen what this company has become under your guidance. The mentorship programs, the ethical oversight committees, the work-life balance initiatives. My father would dismantle all of that if he returned to power. He won't return to power, I said with quiet confidence. How can you be so sure? I smiled slightly. Because I learned from our first encounter. I've maintained comprehensive records of every decision, every implementation, every success. If Porter wants to challenge my integrity, he'll find I'm much better prepared this time around. Cameron studied me with new understanding. You really did orchestrate his downfall, didn't you? I orchestrated nothing. I simply stopped protecting him from his own actions. I held his gaze. Your father created an empire built on intimidation and manipulation. Empires like that don't collapse because of one person's actions. They collapse because they were built on unstable foundations. He nodded slowly. I want to help. With what? Protecting what you've built here. I've spent my life watching my father destroy things. I'd like to try preserving something good for a change. Over the next few weeks, Cameron proved himself a valuable ally. He understood his father's thinking patterns, could anticipate his strategies. With his insights, we strengthened our documentation processes and corporate governance structures, closing potential vulnerabilities before they could be exploited. Porter's appeal was denied, as expected. His attempts to reach former board members yielded little support. They had all moved on, unwilling to risk their reputations by associating with him again. The story briefly resurfaced in financial news circles, then faded again. 6 months later, I received an unexpected visitor. The receptionist called up. There's a Helena Porter here to see you, no appointment. Grayson Porter's wife. I hadn't seen her since the company holiday party 3 years earlier, where she'd stood by his side, elegant and reserved, making appropriate small talk while never revealing anything of substance. I agreed to meet her. Helena entered my office with the composed dignity I remembered, though the designer clothes and perfect grooming couldn't hide her exhaustion. Thank you for seeing me, she began, declining my offer of a seat. I'll be brief. I want you to stop using my son as a pawn in whatever game you're playing with my husband. Cameron is an adult who makes his own choices. I replied evenly. He's a valued employee who earned his position through merit. He's a confused young man trying to understand his father's downfall by working for the woman who engineered it. Her voice was controlled but bitter. Haven't you taken enough from our family? Your husband threatened to destroy my ability to provide for my children, I said quietly. He was willing to make 3 innocent kids suffer to protect himself. What happened afterward was the natural consequence of his own actions. Helena's composure wavered slightly. You have children? 3. My husband died 4 years ago. This job was all that stood between them and financial disaster. Something shifted in her expression. Not sympathy exactly, but recognition. Grayson never mentioned your circumstances. He never asked. She nodded slowly, absorbing this. I'm not defending what he did, but Cameron is all I have left. Since Grayson went to prison, our daughter hasn't spoken to either of us. Our friends disappeared. The life I spent 30 years building vanished overnight. I understand loss, I said, but Cameron isn't being manipulated. He's trying to build something meaningful from the ruins. Helena finally took the seat I had offered. Is he good at his job? Very. He has his father's intelligence and attention to detail, but none of his cruelty. She finished for me. You can say it. I lived with it for decades. We sat in unexpected mutual understanding, 2 women whose lives had been shaped by the same man in drastically different ways. Why did you stay? I asked, curiosity overcoming professional boundaries. The same reason you endured his behavior for 3 years, she replied. Fear of what would happen if I didn't. She smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her skirt, and hoped that the man I fell in love with might return if I just supported him enough, forgave enough, accommodated enough. I recognized the familiar calculus of compromise that so many women perform daily. Cameron doesn't know I'm here, Helena continued. He would be furious if he found out, but I needed to see for myself what kind of person you are. And? A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Not what Grayson described. As she stood to leave, Helena paused. My husband will never stop trying to reclaim what he lost. He defines himself by his victories, not his relationships. That's something I learned too late. After she left, I sat quietly, thinking about patterns across generations, how Porter had lost his son by treating him as an extension of himself rather than an individual with his own needs and values. How different my approach had been with my own children, prioritizing their well-being over my pride. That evening, I arrived home to find Ren at the kitchen table surrounded by college brochures. Early research, she explained. I want to study corporate law. I raised an eyebrow, surprised. Any particular reason? I want to understand how to build systems that protect people instead of exploiting them. She sorted the brochures methodically. After everything with your old company, I've been reading about corporate ethics. There's so much broken in how businesses operate. I felt a complex mix of pride and concern. That's a challenging field. I know, but I'm good at seeing patterns, finding inconsistencies. She looked up at me with a confidence that reminded me of myself before years of working under Porter had temporarily diminished it. I get that from you. Thea wandered in, grabbing an apple from the fruit bowl. If Ren's going to be a corporate lawyer, I'm thinking about journalism. Like Rowan? I asked, amused by my children's career planning. Yeah, they actually came to my school for career day, talked about investigative reporting. He bit into the apple. Seemed cool, digging up secrets, exposing corruption. It's important work, I agreed, but not always safe or stable. He shrugged. Neither was your job, but you managed. I couldn't argue with that logic. Penny, not to be outdone, announced her own aspirations over dinner. I'm going to be a doctor who fixes kids like me. She demonstrated with her fork how she would fix the joints affected by her arthritis. Looking at my 3 children, each inspired in different ways by the challenges we'd faced, I realized that Porter's greatest miscalculation had been assuming that threatening a parent's livelihood would lead to submission rather than determination. The following day, Cameron stopped by my office with an update on his departmental project. After his report, He hesitated before speaking again. My mother told me she came to see you, he said. I want to apologize for that. No need. It was a productive conversation. He looked skeptical. She's been protective since everything happened with my father. As any mother would be, I replied. She loves you. I know, but she still doesn't fully understand why I needed to work here. He gestured around my office. To see that there's a different way to lead. And what have you observed so far? I asked, genuinely curious. That strength doesn't require cruelty. That accountability doesn't mean assigning blame. That the most effective power isn't the kind that announces itself constantly. I nodded, pleased by his insights. Those lessons took me much longer to learn. As Cameron left, I thought about cycles, how they perpetuate and how they break. Porter had created a cycle of fear and retaliation that rippled outward, affecting not just employees but their families, their health, their futures. In dismantling his empire, I hadn't just secured justice for myself but potentially interrupted a pattern that might have continued through his son. The quarterly board meeting approached, marking 2 years since Porter's removal. The company had not just recovered but thrived under new leadership. Client trust had been restored, employee retention had improved dramatically, and our ethical business practices had become a model for the industry. The night before the meeting, I received an unexpected email from a prison address, Grayson Porter. Ms. Nash, I understand my son now works directly for you. An interesting development, wouldn't you say? Perhaps you believe this completes your victory, turning my own child against me. You've built quite the reputation as a corporate reformer. The board practically worships you. The employees see you as their savior. Everyone has forgotten that you were just an assistant who got lucky with some stolen documents. But we both know the truth. You manipulated evidence, influenced witnesses, and orchestrated a campaign against me long before any journalist got involved. You weren't protecting the company. You were exacting revenge because I saw through your incompetence. My appeal may have been denied, but I still have resources, connections you can't imagine. When I return, and I will return, remember that you chose this path. Your temporary victory has made you visible, Abilene, and visible targets are easier to hit. GP. I read the email twice, noting his persistent delusion that his downfall had been engineered rather than earned. His inability to acknowledge his own role in creating the circumstances that led to his imprisonment. His continuing belief that I had acted from petty revenge rather than moral necessity. Most troubling was his reference to visibility. He was right about one thing. I was no longer invisible. My work restructuring the company had put me in the spotlight, made me identifiable, traceable. I had children to protect, a life I'd carefully rebuilt. I forwarded the email to the company's legal team with a brief note explaining its threatening nature, then called Rowan. He's trying to intimidate you, Rowan said after I read them the email. Classic Porter move, when direct action fails, resort to psychological pressure. It's more than that, I replied. He's signaling that he still has influence even from prison. Do you want me to look into his current connections? See if there's any substance to the threat? I considered this. Yes, but discreetly. I don't want to elevate his importance by appearing concerned. That night, I checked our home security system twice before bed. I reviewed the children's daily routines, mentally noting vulnerabilities. Porter's threat had awakened the hypervigilance I'd developed during my years working for him, the constant awareness of potential danger, the preparation for attack. At breakfast, Ren noticed my distraction. What's wrong? You keep looking at the windows. I forced a smile. Just thinking about the board presentation today. She didn't look convinced but didn't press further. The board meeting proceeded smoothly. Our quarterly results exceeded expectations, and my proposals for expanding the mentorship program received unanimous approval. As we adjourned, the chair asked me to stay behind. We've been approached by a journalist, she said once we were alone. They're working on a feature about corporate reformation, using our company as a case study. Which publication? I asked, immediately alert. Business Innovation Quarterly. They specifically requested to interview you as the architect of our ethical restructuring. Not Rowan's outlet. Someone new. Someone I hadn't vetted. I'll need to review their questions in advance. I said carefully. Given our company's history, we should be cautious about any press coverage. The chair agreed, and I left with a growing sense of unease. Was this legitimate interest in our corporate transformation? Or something Porter had orchestrated from prison? Had he found a way to use media access to undermine my credibility? I called Rowan again, who promised to investigate the publication and the journalist assigned to the story. Don't panic, they advised. Porter has limited reach from prison. This is likely legitimate interest in your success. But success had never been my goal. Security had. Stability for my children. A workplace where talent was valued over obedience. Porter's email had reminded me how quickly security could become vulnerability when someone like him held a grudge. That evening, as I helped the children with homework, my phone buzzed with a text from Rowan. Journalist checks out. Legitimate assignment, but found something else. Call me. I waited until the children were occupied with their evening routines before calling. Porter's been communicating with someone at your company, Rowan said without preamble. Regular emails through his attorney, ostensibly about his remaining financial interests, but the timing corresponds with key decisions you've announced. Who? Can't confirm yet, but the communications go to an executive-level address. A mole in senior management, someone feeding Porter information, keeping him connected to the company he'd lost. The realization was both infuriating and frightening. Can you trace it more specifically? Working on it. Be careful, Abilene. Porter might be contained, but his influence isn't. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table, thinking through the implications. Who among the executives might still be loyal to Porter? Who had the most to gain from undermining the new direction? Who had seemed too accepting of changes that should have threatened their position? Names and faces cycled through my mind. The CFO who had narrowly avoided implication in Porter's financial schemes. The operations director who had been Porter's golf partner. The marketing head who owed her rapid promotion to Porter's patronage. My phone rang again, an unknown number. I answered cautiously. Ms. Nash? A woman's voice, unfamiliar. This is Dr. Eliza Walsh from Pinehurst Memorial. We have your daughter Penny here in the emergency department. My heart stopped. What happened? Is she all right? She's stable. There was an incident at her after-school program. She complained of sudden severe joint pain and difficulty breathing. Given her medical history, they called an ambulance. I'll be right there. I hung up, grabbed my keys, and called my neighbor to watch the twins. As I drove, my mind raced through possibilities. An arthritis flare, an allergic reaction, an accident. At the hospital, I was directed to a treatment room where Penny lay connected to monitors, looking small and frightened. Mom! She cried when she saw me. I didn't know what was happening. Everything hurt, and then I couldn't breathe right. The doctor explained they were running tests, but suspected an unusual reaction to a new medication Penny's rheumatologist had prescribed the previous week. Has she taken it before today? The doctor asked. Every day for the past week, I confirmed. No previous reactions. The doctor frowned. The pharmacist is checking the medication. It's possible there was a dispensing error. 2 hours and several tests later, we had confirmation. Penny's medication had been incorrectly filled with a similar-looking but much higher-dose drug intended for adult patients. The pharmacy had apparently mixed up prescriptions, an error that could have been fatal if the after-school staff hadn't responded so quickly. As Penny slept in the hospital bed, medication slowly clearing her system, I sat beside her, my mind making connections I didn't want to acknowledge. The timing, immediately after Porter's threatening email. The specificity, targeting my most vulnerable child, the one with ongoing medical needs. The method, subtle, appearing as a simple pharmacy error. I called Rowan from the hospital corridor. I need you to look into something else, I said quietly, explaining what had happened. You think Porter arranged this? They asked, sounding skeptical. A pharmacy error seems random, even for him. Nothing is random with Porter. Check if anyone connected to him has ties to the pharmacy chain, the specific location, anything. Abilene, Rowan said gently. Mistakes happen. Not everything is a conspiracy. But I had spent 3 years watching Porter orchestrate coincidences that benefited him. I had seen how he cultivated connections in unexpected places, how he exploited systems most people took for granted. I had learned to recognize his particular brand of retribution: indirect, plausibly deniable, but precisely targeted. Penny was released the next morning with instructions for monitoring and a follow-up appointment. I took her home, called into work, and spent the day watching her recover, playing board games and reading stories like we had when she was younger. By evening, she was almost back to normal, the episode already becoming an exciting story to tell her siblings. And then they put this mask on me that made me sound like a robot, she explained to the twins, who listened with appropriate awe. After the children were asleep, I received a call from Rowan. "You need to hear this," they said. "The pharmacy technician who filled Penny's prescription was hired 3 months ago. Before that, she worked as a receptionist at a law firm that represents several of Porter's former business associates." My suspicions crystallized into certainty. He's sending a message, showing me he can reach my children. "It's circumstantial," Rowan cautioned, "but concerning enough that you should take precautions." "What kind of precautions protect against someone willing to poison a child to make a point?" I asked, fear giving way to fury. "We document everything," Rowan replied after a moment. "The pharmacy error, the technician's connection to Porter's associates. We build a case methodically, just like before." "This isn't like before," I said, my voice breaking. "This is my child." "Which is exactly why you can't react emotionally. That's what he wants, to make you angry enough to make mistakes." I paced my living room, checking the locks on windows and doors again. I won't wait for him to try something else. I need to end this now. "How?" Rowan asked. The question hung between us. How do you stop someone who still has influence despite being imprisoned? How do you protect your family from a man who views innocent children as acceptable collateral damage? I need to talk to his wife again, I decided. Helena might know who's helping him, who his remaining allies are. The next day, after arranging for the children to stay with my sister and implementing new security measures at our home, I called Helena Porter. She agreed to meet at a quiet cafe halfway between our homes. She looked more worn than during our office meeting, the careful facade of composure thinner. "Cameron told me about your daughter," she said as she sat down. "I'm sorry." "Did you know?" I asked directly. "Did you know what your husband was planning?" Helena's eyes widened. "You think Grayson arranged that? A medication error?" "It fits his pattern. Indirect harm, plausible deniability, precise targeting." She shook her head slowly. "I haven't communicated with him in months. Not since." She hesitated. "Since what?" "Since I filed for divorce," she admitted. "After our last conversation, I realized I couldn't keep defending a man who would threaten someone's children." This surprised me. "Does Cameron know?" "Yes. He's been supportive, actually. Said it was overdue." She stirred her untouched tea. "Grayson doesn't know yet. My attorney is handling the paperwork." I studied her, looking for signs of deception and finding only exhaustion. "He sent me a threatening email the day before my daughter's medication error. He mentioned having resources and connections." Helena's expression hardened. "He always exaggerates his influence. It makes him feel powerful. But he does have someone inside the company feeding him information." She considered this. "Have you checked Anton Mercer? He was Grayson's protege before everything happened. Kept a low profile during the scandal, but never openly condemned Grayson's actions." Anton Mercer, our current marketing director. He had survived the corporate purge after Porter's downfall by presenting himself as merely following orders, uninvolved in the financial manipulation. I had never fully trusted him, but had no specific evidence against him. "Thank you," I said. "There's something else I need to ask. Who else might help him? Who remained loyal even after everything came to light?" Helena's laugh held no humor. "Loyalty isn't something Grayson inspires. People fear him or need something from him. But genuine loyalty?" She shook her head. "Even his oldest friends abandoned him once he could no longer benefit them." "Yet someone is helping him," I insisted. "Someone with access to my daughter's medical information, her pharmacy." Helena grew still. "There is one person, not a friend exactly, more of a service provider, someone who handled certain problems for Grayson over the years." Who? He only ever referred to him as Kieran. No last name. Whenever something needed to be handled quietly, a potential whistleblower, a threatening competitor, Kieran would be mentioned in passing. I never met him, never knew exactly what he did. She met my eyes. But problems disappeared after Kieran became involved. A chill ran through me. How would I find this person? I don't know. Grayson was careful to keep that relationship compartmentalized. She hesitated. But I remember something. Years ago, Grayson mentioned that Kieran had helped him with a situation at the Children's Hospital fundraiser. Something about ensuring a certain doctor didn't attend. Which hospital? Pinehurst Memorial, where your daughter was treated yesterday. The connection was too specific to be coincidence. Porter had a contact at the same hospital where Penny had been taken. Someone who could access records, influence treatment decisions, perhaps even coordinate with a pharmacy technician. I thanked Helena for her help and left, immediately calling Rowan to share what I'd learned. I'll look into Mercer's communications at the company, they promised. And I have contacts who can search for this Kieran person. If he works at Pinehurst, there will be records. Be careful, I warned. If this person has been Porter's fixer for years, they're likely dangerous and well-connected. Always am. What's your next move? Setting a trap, I replied. If Porter wants to communicate with someone inside the company, let's give him something worth discussing. The next morning, I called an emergency executive meeting. Anton Mercer arrived last, his usual polished appearance slightly rumpled, as if he'd dressed in a hurry. Thank you all for coming on short notice, I began. I've received information that requires immediate action. Our financial restructuring has uncovered evidence of additional improprieties during Porter's tenure, specifically, offshore accounts that weren't included in the original investigation. This was a fabrication, but delivered with such conviction that even those who had been with the company during the initial scandal looked surprised. These accounts contain significant assets that legally belong to the company, I continued. I've already spoken with our legal team about recovery procedures, but wanted to inform the executive committee before proceeding. I watched reactions carefully. Most showed appropriate interest or concern. Mercer's face remained impassive, but his fingers tightened around his pen. The recovery process will begin next week, I concluded. Until then, this information remains confidential. Any questions? There were a few technical inquiries, which I answered vaguely, citing ongoing legal constraints. Throughout the meeting, Mercer took detailed notes, more than the sparse information provided would warrant. After the meeting, I contacted our IT security director, Naomi, whom I trusted completely. I need to monitor all of Anton Mercer's communications for the next 48 hours, I explained. External emails, phone calls, texts sent from company devices. Naomi raised an eyebrow but asked no questions. I'll need authorization from legal. Already arranged, I assured her, having spoken with our general counsel immediately after meeting with Helena. By evening, we had our first result. Mercer had sent an email from his personal account to an encrypted address, referencing urgent development regarding previously discussed assets and requesting a secure call. We've got him, Rowan said when I forwarded the evidence. This matches the communication pattern I found earlier. Same encrypted recipient. Can you trace the recipient? Working on it, but there's something else. I found 3 employees at Pinehurst Memorial with the first name Kieran. One stands out, Kieran Lawson, head of hospital security for the past 15 years. The perfect position for Porter's fixer, access to all areas of the hospital, authority over security protocols, ability to monitor who comes and goes, and a job that would naturally connect with law enforcement, creating a network of useful relationships. We need to move carefully, I cautioned. If this Kieran person really has been handling Porter's dirty work for years, he's dangerous. What's your plan? I thought about my children, Penny still recovering from her medication error, the twins blissfully unaware of the threat hanging over our family. I thought about Cameron Porter, trying to build something honest from his father's corrupt legacy. I thought about my own journey from invisible assistant to corporate reformer. We use Porter's playbook against him, I decided. Pressure points, vulnerabilities, carefully timed revelations. But this time, we bring everything into the light at once. First, I contacted Cameron. "I need to speak with you about your father," I said when he arrived at my office. "There's something you should know." I explained everything: the threatening email, Penny's medication error, the connection to Kieran Lawson, and Anton Mercer's role as informant. I watched his face transition from shock to horror to resolve. "What can I do?" he asked when I finished. "Visit your father. Tell him you know what he's doing. Make it clear that if anything happens to me or my children, you'll personally ensure every detail of his operations becomes public, including whatever Kieran has done for him over the years." Cameron nodded slowly. "He'll listen to me. Despite everything, he still sees me as his legacy." "There's something else," I added. "I need you to tell him that I've established dead man switches. If anything happens to me or my family, evidence of his connection to Kieran's activities will automatically be sent to federal investigators and the press." "Is that true?" Cameron asked. "It will be by the time you speak with him." Next, I met with Naomi to implement actual dead man switches, digital insurance policies that would activate if I failed to enter specific codes at regular intervals. These would release carefully prepared documentation to Rowan, federal authorities, and the company board. Then I called Helena again. "I need everything you have on your husband's business practices, documentation, records, anything that might connect him to illegal activities beyond what was already prosecuted." "Why would I have such things?" she asked. "Because you're divorcing a controlling man with significant assets and a history of retaliation. You would have gathered insurance." Her silence confirmed my assumption. "I'm not asking you to testify against him," I clarified. "I just need the information as leverage." "To protect your children," she said softly. "Yes. I'll have my attorney send copies of what I've gathered." With these pieces in place, I contacted Rowan one final time. "I need you to prepare an article, the complete story of Porter's ongoing criminal activities from prison, his use of Kieran Lawson as a fixer, and the targeting of my family. Don't publish yet, but have it ready." "What's the trigger for publication?" they asked. "My word or evidence that any of us has been harmed." That evening, I brought my children home from my sister's house. I had installed new security systems, changed our routines, and alerted their schools to allow no unauthorized pickups. I wouldn't hide them away or live in fear. Instead, I would eliminate the threat at its source. Cameron visited his father the next day. Porter apparently received him with the smug confidence of a man who believed himself still in control despite his circumstances. That confidence evaporated as Cameron methodically outlined what we knew: Mercer's role as informant, Kieran's position as fixer, the deliberate targeting of Penny. "He denied everything at first," Cameron reported afterward, then tried to justify it as protecting his interests. "When I mentioned the dead man switches and my willingness to testify about what I knew, he became very quiet." "What exactly did he say?" I asked. "That he would reconsider his approach. Then he asked what it would take for this to go away." "And you told him?" Cameron nodded. "Complete cessation of all communication with company employees. No contact with Kieran Lawson or anyone else who might harm your family. Acceptance of Helena's divorce terms. And a signed confession about his relationship with Lawson and any illegal activities they conducted together." "He'll never agree to the confession," I predicted. "No, but asking for it tells him how much we know. It's a warning shot." I wasn't convinced Porter would be deterred so easily. Men like him don't surrender power willingly. They retreat, regroup, and attack from new angles. My suspicion proved correct 2 days later when Rowan called with an update. Kieran Lawson has taken sudden leave from the hospital. And Anton Mercer cleaned out his office last night, left a resignation letter citing family obligations. They were cutting ties, eliminating connections that could be traced back to Porter. It wasn't surrender. It was tactical retreat. "There's something else," Rowan continued. "Porter has requested a transfer to a different facility, claiming concerns about his safety. A strategic move. New prison meant new communications channels, new potential allies, new ways to reestablish his influence network away from our scrutiny. We need to move before he transfers," I decided. "Time to use everything we've gathered." First, I contacted the federal prosecutor who had handled Porter's original case, sharing our evidence of his continued criminal enterprise from prison. The prosecutor was particularly interested in Kieran Lawson's role and the targeting of my daughter. Next, I arranged for Helena's documentation to be reviewed by the company's legal team, revealing additional financial schemes that hadn't been included in the original prosecution. Finally, I gave Rowan permission to publish their article, not the vengeful exposé Porter would expect, but a meticulously researched piece about corporate reform and the challenges of dismantling corruption that had become institutionalized. The article mentioned Porter only as context, focusing instead on the positive changes implemented since his removal and the ongoing vigilance required to prevent similar abuses. The impact was more powerful than a direct attack could have been. The prosecutor opened a new investigation into Porter's activities from prison. Kieran Lawson was located and brought in for questioning. Anton Mercer, fearing implication, offered to cooperate in exchange for immunity. Porter's prison transfer was denied pending the new investigation. His remaining assets were frozen. His communication privileges were restricted. Most significantly, the narrative changed. Instead of Porter as the powerful puppet master still pulling strings from prison, he became a cautionary tale, a former executive so consumed by vengeance that he risked his remaining freedom to threaten a mother and her children. A week after the article published, I received a handwritten letter from Porter. Unlike his previous threatening email, this message was subdued, almost resigned. Ms. Nash, you have outmaneuvered me again. I underestimated your patience, your thoroughness, and your willingness to use my own tactics against me. My son tells me you've transformed the company into something unrecognizable to me, built on transparency rather than leverage, collaboration rather than competition. He speaks of you with the respect he once reserved for me. I find I have nothing left to threaten you with. My remaining assets are frozen. My allies have abandoned me. My wife is divorcing me. My daughter hasn't spoken to me in years. And my son now views you as a mentor. You have won, not just the battle, but the war. I acknowledge your victory. Grayson Porter. I read the letter twice, searching for hidden threats or manipulations. Finding none, I filed it away, not as a trophy, but as closure. That weekend, I took my children to the park, something I hadn't done without anxiety since Porter's threats began. Watching Penny chase butterflies while the twins practiced soccer moves, I felt a weightlifting that I hadn't fully acknowledged carrying. Mom, watch this, Theo called, attempting an elaborate kick that sent the ball sailing into a nearby pond. Nice work, I laughed as he waded in to retrieve it. Ren sat beside me on the bench. You seem happier, she observed. Did something good happen at work? I considered how to explain. Let's just say a long-standing problem has been resolved. The Porter problem? She asked, surprising me with her directness. You knew about that? She rolled her eyes in typical teenage fashion. Mom, we're not babies. We know that guy was trying to cause trouble. Theo and I talked about it. You did? Yeah. We decided if he ever showed up at our house, Theo would distract him while I called 911. She said this matter-of-factly, as if discussing homework strategies. I put my arm around her shoulders. That won't be necessary now, but I appreciate the planning. 2 weeks later, the new investigation into Porter resulted in additional charges: witness tampering, conspiracy, attempted harm to a minor. Kieran Lawson faced his own charges, his long history as Porter's fixer finally exposed. Anton Mercer's testimony revealed the extent of Porter's continued influence within the company. Porter's already substantial sentence was extended. His communication privileges were permanently restricted. His remaining assets were liquidated to pay additional restitution. Cameron requested a meeting after the new charges were announced. I want you to know I don't blame you for any of this, he said. My father made his choices. It can't be easy, seeing him face additional punishment, I acknowledged. Actually, it's clarifying. For years, I wondered if he was really as bad as people said or if he'd been unfairly targeted. Now I know. He hesitated. I've been thinking about what you said about sustainable success requiring trust. I want to build something like that, something that lasts because it deserves to, not because people are afraid to challenge it. You will, I assured him. You have the insight your father lacked. At home that evening, I found Penny sitting at the kitchen table, carefully drawing what appeared to be a family portrait. What's this? I asked, examining her artwork. It's us, she explained, pointing to each figure. That's you. That's me. That's Ren and Theo. And that's Dad watching from heaven. It's beautiful, I said, touched by her inclusion of Emmett. And these are all the people who help us, she continued, indicating smaller figures around the edges of the paper. My teachers, Aunt Lisbeth, your friends from work. You've included a lot of people, I observed. Because we have a lot of people who care about us, she replied simply. That's what makes us strong, right? Not being alone? From the mouth of my 9-year-old came the lesson I had learned through years of struggle, that true strength comes not from power over others, but from connection with them. Not from fear, but from trust. A month later, I was offered the position of CEO at the company I had helped transform. The board cited my leadership during the crisis, my vision for ethical reform, and my ability to rebuild trust with clients and employees alike. I accepted with one condition: a commitment to work, life balance that would allow me to be present for my children. No more missed school plays or soccer games. No more working weekends unless absolutely necessary. No more sacrificing family for corporate success. On my first day as CEO, I walked through the office that had once been Porter's domain. The space had been redesigned, the imposing desk replaced with a round conference table, the intimidating artwork exchanged for photographs of team achievements, the heavy door always open rather than strategically closed. Cameron stopped by to offer congratulations. What's your first order of business as CEO? He asked. I showed him the new organizational chart I'd developed, a flatter structure with clearer pathways for concerns to be raised, greater transparency in decision-making, and stronger protections for those who identified problems. No more invisible assistants taking notes on corruption, I explained. No more employees choosing between ethics and employment. My father would hate everything about this, Cameron observed. That's how I know we're on the right track, I replied. That evening, I arrived home early enough to help with homework, prepare dinner, and hear about each child's day in detail. As we sat around our kitchen table, Ren describing a debate team victory, Theo planning his next journalism club project, Penny proudly displaying a science test with a perfect score, I felt a sense of completion. Porter had threatened my ability to provide for my children, thinking it would force my submission. Instead, it had triggered a transformation not just of a corrupt company, but of my own understanding of power. Not as something to be hoarded and wielded against others, but as something to be shared in service of creating systems where everyone could thrive. My revenge against Porter hadn't been about destroying him. It had been about building something better from the ruins of what he'd created. Something sustainable, something worthy, something that would long outlast his legacy of fear. If you've ever felt powerless in the face of intimidation, remember this: your greatest strength may be your patience, your perspective, your willingness to work within broken systems until the moment arrives to transform them. The most effective revenge isn't destruction, it's creation. It's building something so much better that the old way becomes obsolete. My name is Abilene Nash. I spent 3 years as the invisible woman beside a powerful man. I protected my children when he threatened their security. I rebuilt a company he had corrupted. And I discovered that justice, when pursued with patience and precision, is far more satisfying than mere vengeance could ever be. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear that their seemingly powerless position could be the perfect vantage point from which to create lasting change. Sometimes the person taking notes is the one who ultimately writes the ending. Jake gets the director position. No offense, but he's just better suited. The words came out of her mouth like she was ordering coffee. Casual, easy. 23 people in that room. I'd trained 19 of them myself, held their hands through their first presentations, fixed their errors at 2 in the morning when deadlines loomed impossible, answered their panicked calls on weekends when they couldn't figure out systems I'd built from scratch. Jake had been here 64 days. 64. His girlfriend, the woman saying these words with such careless certainty, had known him for 9 weeks. 9 weeks versus 8 years. 96 months of showing up early, leaving late, carrying projects nobody wanted, fixing problems nobody else could solve. 96 months of being the person everyone called when things broke. 8 years of building something from nothing, of turning a failing department into one that generated $42 million in annual revenue. And she gave it to her boyfriend of 9 weeks. She reached over and squeezed his hand. He shifted in his seat, uncomfortable, wouldn't meet my eyes. He should have been uncomfortable. 2 months ago, he couldn't find the supply closet. Last week, he'd asked me which building our main client operated from. The client we'd worked with for 6 consecutive years. The client whose account I'd personally saved twice. But he was dating the boss's granddaughter, and apparently that counted more than anything I'd done. I stood, smiled, said the words that were expected of me. Congratulations. I'm sure you'll do great things. My voice didn't shake. My hands didn't tremble. I'd learned a long time ago how to disappear my feelings, how to be professional when everything inside me was screaming. Then I walked out. Nobody followed me. Nobody said a word. But here's what nobody in that room knew. Here's the part that changes everything. What I did next, it wasn't planned as revenge. It was survival. It was 8 years of being invisible, finally becoming visible in a way nobody, and I mean nobody, saw coming. Before I go any further, though, I want to say thank you. Thank you for being here, for listening to this, for giving me your time. If this story hits you the way it hit me, living through every moment of it, do me a favor. Hit that like button, drop a comment, and tell me if you've ever felt invisible at your job, if you've ever watched someone less qualified get what you earned. And subscribe, because stories like this, real stories about real people fighting back in unexpected ways, they need to be heard. Now, let's continue. My name is Lennox, 34 years old when this happened. People always said I had a forgettable face. Not ugly, not beautiful, just ordinary, in every measurable way. The kind of person who blends into backgrounds. Brown hair, average height, features that don't stand out in any particular direction. I'd learned to use that. While everyone else fought for attention, performed for recognition, I built things quietly. Real things, systems, processes, relationships that actually mattered. 8 years earlier, I'd walked into that company for an entry-level interview. 26 years old, hungry for something I couldn't name, tired of being invisible but not knowing how to change it. The interview went fine. Standard questions about my experience, my goals, my strengths. I gave standard answers. The hiring manager seemed pleased but non-committal. Said they'd call. Then an old man walked into the room. He was 71 then, though he moved like someone younger. Founder of the company. Built it from absolute nothing 40 years prior with money borrowed from family and a vision nobody else could see. Then he'd step back when his son was ready, let the next generation run daily operations. But he still came around, still watched, still cared deeply about what he'd created. He sat down in the empty seat, looked at me for a long moment that felt like assessment, and asked 3 questions. What do you do when nobody's watching? Who did you lose that you can't forget? What are you building that nobody sees yet? Nobody had ever asked me questions like that. Not in interviews, not anywhere. They hit something deep, something true. I answered honestly, told him about my mother, how she died when I was 19, sudden car accident on a Tuesday afternoon, how I promised her at the hospital before she went that I'd matter somehow. Told him I worked late when everyone left because that's when the real work happened, when you could actually think, actually build, without constant interruption. Told him I was building a version of myself that wouldn't disappear when people stopped looking. He hired me on the spot. You remind me of someone, he said, voice quiet, eyes somewhere else. Someone I lost. I didn't ask who. Felt too personal, too raw. But over the next 8 years, I figured it out in pieces. His name was Hollis, and his story became tangled with mine in ways neither of us expected. I started entry-level, bottom of the structure, but I moved fast. Not because I played politics or networked aggressively. I just solved problems. When systems broke, I fixed them. When processes failed, I rebuilt them. When clients threatened to leave, I gave them reasons to stay. Hollis would stop by sometimes. Every few months, we'd talk for 5 minutes, sometimes less, about business philosophy, about life choices, about the weight of building something meaningful. These conversations felt important in ways I couldn't articulate. Most people work for paychecks, he told me once, early on. A few work for legacy, your legacy. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just kept working. His wife died when I'd been there 6 years. Cancer, the slow kind that takes everything piece by piece. I went to the funeral service along with 200 other employees, paid respects, signed the memory book, but I also sent flowers to his house afterward. Not company flowers with the corporate logo, personal ones, white lilies. Wrote a note about how loss reshapes us into people we don't recognize, how memory becomes the only place we can hold the people we've lost, how grief is just love with nowhere to go. He called me that night, 10:30. I almost didn't answer. We talked for 2 hours, about his wife, about my mother, about how work becomes this hiding place when home holds too much pain. He told me about 47 years of marriage, about watching someone you love disappear slowly, about feeling guilty for being relieved when it finally ended because, at least, she wasn't suffering anymore. I told him about being 19 and suddenly alone, about how I still set 2 places at dinner sometimes before remembering. After that call, things shifted. He started coming by more often. We'd have coffee in the building cafe, lunch at quiet restaurants away from the office where nobody knew us. Nothing inappropriate, nothing that crossed professional lines. Just 2 people who understood what it meant to lose someone and keep walking forward anyway. My son doesn't understand, he told me repeatedly. His son, Lawrence, ran the company now, had for 15 years. He thinks companies are about money, profit margins, growth percentages. But money without meaning is just math. It doesn't sustain you. It doesn't matter. Lawrence ran everything by numbers. He was good at it. The company made money. Stock prices rose. Investors were happy. But there was no soul in it anymore. No purpose beyond quarterly earnings. 3 years ago, Lawrence's daughter joined the company. Her name was Piper, 25 years old, fresh from a prestigious graduate school, with perfect grades and 0 real-world experience. Smart in that academic way that doesn't translate to actual application. Book knowledge without wisdom. She made mistakes, big ones, sent confidential information to wrong clients, made promises in meetings we couldn't keep, alienated a major account with careless comments about their industry. I fixed them quietly, stayed late, made calls, smoothed relationships, never mentioned it to anyone, never kept receipts or built resentment. That's what you do when you care about something larger than yourself. You protect it. Hollis noticed. He noticed everything. You're protecting her, he said one afternoon over coffee. She's learning, I replied. Everyone makes mistakes early on. Lawrence gives her everything. Authority without experience. Position without preparation. But you give her room to grow. That's rarer. That's valuable. I shrugged. Didn't know what to say. She doesn't appreciate it, he continued. Probably doesn't even know you're doing it. That's okay. I'm not doing it for appreciation. He looked at me for a long moment. You're a better person than most people deserve. 6 months ago, things between Hollis and me changed fundamentally. We were walking through this park near his house. Spring evening, birds making noise in trees. Temperature perfect. He stopped suddenly, took my hand, held it like he was holding something fragile and precious. I'm 84 years old, he said. His voice was steady, but his hand trembled slightly. I don't have time to pretend anymore. You make me feel alive in ways I forgot existed. I should have stopped it there. Should have said something about professionalism, about age difference, about his family, and what they'd think. But I didn't. Because he was right. Something alive existed between us. Something genuine and rare. We kept it private. Had to. Lawrence would have combusted with rage. Piper would have seen it as betrayal, as manipulation. So we met in quiet places nobody else frequented. Built something real in the spaces between everyone else's expectations and judgments. 3 weeks before the promotion announcement that destroyed everything, Hollis proposed. We were at his house. Late evening, rain outside, making soft sounds against windows. He pulled out this ring. Nothing extravagant or showy, just beautiful in its simplicity. Single stone, white gold. Marry me, he said, not asking really, stating, not because I'm old and lonely, not because I want someone to take care of me in my final years, because you're brilliant and kind and you see the world the way I do, because I want to spend whatever time I have left watching you build things. I told him I needed time, not because I didn't care about him. I did, deeply. But mixing love and work felt dangerous, like juggling knives. One wrong move and everything bleeds. He understood, said he'd wait forever, if that's what I needed. Then came the boardroom meeting, that moment when Piper stood in front of 23 people and gave my job, my position, my everything to Jake, her boyfriend of 9 weeks, the guy who still got lost in our building, the guy who'd asked me last week how to access basic reports. I walked out of that meeting and sat in my vehicle for 40 minutes. Engine off, just breathing, processing, watching rain start falling, my phone on the passenger seat buzzing with messages I didn't read. Then it buzzed with a call. Hollis, I answered. I heard what happened, he said, voice tight with anger. Your granddaughter just gave my job to her boyfriend. Silence, long silence. Then, low and serious and furious. The director position, the one you built from absolutely nothing? Yes, more silence. I could hear him breathing, thinking, calculating. Then, what are you going to do? That's when everything clicked into place. When 8 years of being overlooked crystallized into perfect clarity. Remember your proposal? Of course. Every word. I'd like to accept. This weekend, if possible. Small ceremony. Just us and whoever needs to be there legally. He laughed. Surprised. Delighted. Maybe a little shocked. You're serious right now? Completely. Are you? I've never been more serious about anything in my entire life. We married that Saturday. Judge's private chambers. 10 in the morning. 2 court clerks as required witnesses. Hollis wore navy. I wore a simple dress I'd bought Friday afternoon. We exchanged vows that mattered. Promised things we meant. When the judge pronounced us married, I felt something fundamental shift. Not just in my life, in the entire structure of everything. I wasn't just an employee anymore. I was family. Legally, irrevocably, family. We filed the marriage certificate Monday morning first thing. Public record. Anyone could look it up if they knew to look. But nobody was looking. Tuesday, I came to work like always. Same time, same routine. Kept my wedding band in my bag. Didn't announce anything. Didn't change anything visible. Just did my job. Watched Jake struggle with basic director tasks. These quarterly projections don't make any sense, he said, panicked. Papers scattered everywhere. The formulas are completely broken. They're not broken. You're using them wrong. Can you just fix them real quick? That's not my job anymore. You're the director now. Remember? Better suited and everything. His face went pale. He looked young suddenly. Lost. Piper kept bringing him lunch, kissing him in hallways, acting like she'd won some competition I didn't know we were having. She had absolutely no idea what was coming. Wednesday afternoon, 2:15. Lawrence called an emergency board meeting. Mandatory attendance for all senior staff. Unusual. Concerning. People whispered about layoffs, about mergers, about problems with major clients. I walked in, sat where I always sat, next to the window overlooking the parking structure. Lawrence stood at the front. He looked strange, shaken, like someone had knocked his entire world sideways. We have a situation, he said, voice tight. My father got married over the weekend. People reacted predictably. Congratulations. Clapping. Someone asked about the lucky bride. Another asked if there had been a ceremony. Why nobody was invited. He married an employee, Lawrence said. The words came out like broken glass. Someone from this company. The room transformed. Congratulations died mid-breath. Piper leaned forward, eyes sharp. Who? Her father looked directly at me, held my eyes. Her. Every single head turned. 23 people staring. I pulled my wedding band from my bag and slipped it onto my finger. Slowly, deliberately. Piper stood so fast her seat rolled backward and hit the wall. You what? That's impossible. You can't. Just how dare you? I can, I said quietly, calmly. And I did. Your grandfather asked me to marry him 3 weeks ago. I accepted last Wednesday. We married Saturday morning. It's filed with the county clerk. Completely legal. Completely real. You can look it up. Jake looked confused, overwhelmed. I don't understand. What does this actually change? I looked at him, really looked at him. Young, unqualified, given everything because someone found him attractive. It changes everything. I'm not just an employee who got passed over anymore. I'm legally family now. That means access to family trusts, inheritance considerations, decision-making power in this company's future that didn't exist 5 days ago when you got my job. She didn't just give my promotion away. She gave her grandfather's wife's promotion away. Piper's face drained completely of color. You manipulated him. You seduced an old man for his money and his... For what exactly? I interrupted. Voice still quiet, still calm. Money? I built a department that generates $42 million in annual value. I could have left any time, gone anywhere, worked for competitors who actually appreciated what I do. I married him because he's the only person in this entire building who ever saw what I actually contribute, who valued me for what I built, not for how I looked or who I knew. That's when Hollis walked in. Nobody had seen him at the office in months. Years, maybe. He moved slowly, but with absolute certainty, with authority that made everyone remember exactly who built this company from nothing. She's exactly right, he said. His voice carried weight that silenced every whisper. I asked her to marry me because she's brilliant, kind, hardworking, and sees the world the way I do. My son forgot that businesses are built by people, not positions on charts. My granddaughter forgot that loyalty matters infinitely more than convenience or attraction. This woman spent 8 years making everyone around her better, solving problems nobody else could solve, and you threw her away like garbage for someone who can't even read a basic projection report. He walked to me slowly, put his hand on my shoulder. I'm reinstating her as director, effective immediately. Jake returns to his previous role, and I'm resuming active involvement in company operations, with my wife's counsel and input, until I'm confident leadership understands what actually makes this organization valuable. The room stayed completely silent. Then someone started clapping, then another, then half the room. The people I'd trained, the people I'd helped at 2 a.m, the people who'd watched me get overlooked for 8 straight years. Piper walked out without a word. Jake followed her, looking shell-shocked. Lawrence stayed seated, staring at his father, at me, recalculating his entire world and his place in it. That was 3 years ago. Here's what happened next. Here's where everything gets complicated, where choices carry weight, where winning costs something you didn't expect to pay. Jake quit 2 weeks later, couldn't handle it, the embarrassment, the whispers in hallways, everyone knowing he'd been promoted solely because someone found him attractive, not because he'd earned anything or contributed anything. He left town completely. Last I heard, through mutual connections, he was selling insurance in another state, different industry, different life. Piper requested an immediate transfer. Singapore office, as far from headquarters as geographically possible. She left within a month, sent me exactly 1 message before her flight. I underestimated you. I never responded. Didn't need to. The message said everything that mattered. Lawrence struggled the most profoundly. His father's new marriage meant family dynamics shifted permanently and irrevocably. I wasn't just his employee anymore. I was his stepmother, younger than him by 12 years. His father's wife, his children's step-grandmother. The complete absurdity of it created this tension that never fully resolved itself. Holiday dinners became careful negotiations. Who sat where? Who hosted? Whether I was welcome at family events or if my presence made everything too complicated. Whether we pretended to be a normal family or acknowledged the strangeness. I went to some events, skipped others, let Hollis navigate his family relationships, while I navigated my new reality as both employee and family member. Board meetings changed fundamentally too. I wasn't just director anymore. I was Hollis's wife. When I spoke, people listened with different ears, some with genuine respect, some with deep resentment, some with careful calculation, trying to figure out exactly how much influence I had over the old man's decisions. I did have influence, but not the way they thought. Hollis and I built a real partnership. He'd ask my opinion on major company decisions. I'd tell him the absolute truth, even when it contradicted what Lawrence wanted, even when it made things harder. Sometimes Hollis sided with my perspective, sometimes with his son's. But the fact that I had a genuine voice, that my input actually mattered. It fundamentally changed the entire power structure. Lawrence hated it, not openly. He was far too professional for obvious resentment, but I'd catch him looking at me during meetings with this expression that communicated everything he couldn't say out loud. Piper came back after a year, couldn't stay away forever. This was her family's company, her inheritance, her future, but she returned different, quieter, more careful, more humble. She'd learned something crucial in Singapore about earning respect instead of expecting it, about competence mattering more than connections. We never became friends. That wasn't possible after everything. But we found a way to work together, polite, professional, respectful in a distant way. She stopped dating people from the office, stopped making decisions based purely on personal feelings, started actually learning the business from the ground up like she should have from the beginning. Hollis and I had 5 years together, 5 genuinely good years. We traveled to places he'd always wanted to see, but never had time for. We laughed constantly, built a life together that felt real and meaningful and true. He taught me about patience, about playing the long game, about building things that last beyond your own lifetime. He died 2 months after his 89th birthday. Heart attack in his sleep, quick, peaceful. He didn't suffer, just went to sleep one night beside me and didn't wake up the next morning. The funeral was massive. Hundreds of people, employees past and present, clients, competitors who respected what he'd built, people whose lives he'd touched in ways they never forgot. Lawrence delivered the eulogy, talked about his father's legacy, his vision, his profound impact on everyone who knew him. Never mentioned me once. Piper spoke too, about her grandfather's kindness, his wisdom, how he'd fundamentally shaped who she'd become. Also didn't mention me. I sat in the front row because that's where widows sit, wore black, cried genuine tears, loved a man everyone assumed I'd used. After the service ended, after most people left, Piper approached me. First time we'd spoken directly in months. "Did you ever actually love him?" she asked. Voice quiet but sharp. "Every single day," I said. Met her eyes. "Did you ever actually notice who was making you look good all those years?" She didn't answer, just walked away. Hollis's will surprised everyone except me. He left Lawrence, the company leadership, as expected. Left Piper a significant trust fund, as expected. But he also left me enough company shares to maintain real influence. 20%, not controlling interest, but enough that major decisions required my approval. Enough that I couldn't be ignored or dismissed. Lawrence tried to contest it immediately. His lawyers reviewed everything thoroughly. They told him he'd lose. The marriage was completely legitimate. The will was ironclad. I was legally entitled to my inheritance. So here I am, 3 years later, still working at the company I helped build from a failing department into something profitable and meaningful. Still director, still doing the work that actually matters. But now when I walk into meetings, when I make recommendations, when I push for changes that prioritize people over pure profit, I do it with a voice that cannot be ignored or dismissed. Lawrence still runs daily operations. He's good at it, better than he was. Actually, having someone who can question his decisions, someone he can't fire or intimidate or dismiss, it forced him to think harder about his choices, to consider perspectives beyond pure numbers. Piper moved back to headquarters last year. She's senior vice president now, earned it legitimately this time. We have lunch occasionally, talk about business, about her grandfather, about what it means to build something that outlasts you. She asked me once, over coffee, if I'd planned it, the marriage, the timing, the revenge. No, I told her honestly. I didn't plan any of it. I just refused to disappear. People still talk about me constantly. The woman who married the founder, the employee who became family. Some think I manipulated a vulnerable old man. Some think I'm brilliant. Some think I'm both simultaneously. I don't care anymore what they think. Because here's what I learned through all of this. Being invisible isn't the same as being powerless. Sometimes, the quietest people are building things nobody sees until it's far too late to stop them. Sometimes, the person everyone overlooks is precisely the one who changes everything. I didn't set out to marry my way into power. That wasn't the goal. I set out to be valued by someone who saw what I was actually worth. The power came afterward. The influence came afterward. The revenge, if you want to call it that, came from simply refusing to accept that 9 weeks could erase 8 years. Jake got the position because someone found him attractive. I built a lasting legacy because someone found me invaluable. Those aren't the same thing. They never were. They never will be. Piper learned that lesson. Lawrence learned that lesson. Everyone in that boardroom learned that lesson. And I learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying someone. It's becoming so undeniable that they have to live forever with the weight of what they missed. It's making them watch while you build the life they tried to take from you. It's existing, thriving, succeeding in spaces they thought belonged exclusively to them. I still wear my wedding band, still think about Hollis every single day, still miss him. The grief is absolutely real. So was the love. You can genuinely love someone and benefit from loving them. Those things coexist. Life isn't that simple or that cruel. Would I do it again? Marry an 84-year-old man? Become part of a family that resented my existence? Fight for space in a company that tried to erase me? Yes, without any hesitation. Because I mattered to someone who mattered. Because I built something that lasted. Because when they tried to make me disappear, I became impossible to ignore. That's my story. That's what happened when the CEO's daughter gave my promotion to her boyfriend. That's what she didn't know about me. That's what changed absolutely everything. If you're still here, if you made it this far, thank you. Truly. Stories like this don't get told enough. People who refuse to disappear don't get celebrated enough. So, hit that like button if this resonated with you. Comment and tell me about a time you refused to be invisible. Subscribe because there are more stories like this, more people like me, more endings that nobody sees coming. And remember this, you're not invisible. You're building something. Even if nobody sees it yet, keep building. Your moment is coming. Mine just happened to come with a wedding ring and a board vote. But yours? Yours will be different. Better maybe. Uniquely yours. Just don't let them make you disappear. Don't let 9 weeks erase 8 years. Don't let someone who doesn't see your value convince you it doesn't exist. You matter. Your work matters. Your presence matters. Even when they forget to look. Especially when they forget to look. That's when you build the thing they'll never forget.